Hi, we're going to do a little bit of work in Photoshop today, looking at some of the adjustment layers that will to some extent mirror what you're going to be doing in the darkroom. There'll be things that we can do inside Photoshop which you can't do in the darkroom, but there'll definitely be an overlap, and this is worth bearing in mind when you're doing your work for Unit 9 with Irena and Danny. So I've got an image here from Bilbao, the Guggenheim in Bilbao, and this is a piece of work by Jeff Koons. Sorry, thinking there I was going to say de Kooning, but Jeff Koons, a piece of sculpture by Jeff Koons. I've chosen it because of the colours, and we can use those colours to highlight and emphasise certain elements within the adjustment layers. So what I'd like you to do is, as I'm working through the adjustment layer settings here inside Photoshop, I would like you to open up an image of your own, and as I introduce an adjustment layer, I'd like you then to introduce the same adjustment layer on your image, go through the settings, experiment, and most importantly, screenshot the process and record it. Screenshot it and record it in a Word document. Don't just put screenshots in without any annotation. Make sure that there is annotation around the tools that you're using. This will come into play later on when you receive your assignment. So just to get used to, first of all, to the settings. So layer 1, background layer, currently locked. I'm going to leave that as it is. The nice thing about these adjustment options up here is that they are non-destructive. So I'll show you what that means. So let's put an exposure adjustment layer on there. So first thing you'll notice, it's named exposure 1. That's very useful, and it has this white block on it here. This white block is a mask which we will be using, but in order to activate the mask it must have this little tiny white line around it. Okay, so if you're over on this section, which this section here gives you access to the various exposure settings. But if you're over here, then the mask can't be activated and adjusted. So when we're doing the mask, you've got to make sure that you go back, click it to activate the mask. Okay. So in the exposure settings, I can very quickly enhance or decrease whatever aspect of the exposure that I wish to emphasize in the image. So I'm interested to begin with in the color of the sculpture here at the front of the image. So I'm just going to intensify that a little bit. We can use the eye option here to turn off and on the adjustment layer to see whether or not we like it, and this is one of the really nice things and the non-destructive things about adjustment layers. You can quickly just turn them on and off, see how they work, and then if you can right click on them and you can disable the layer mask. I'm almost certain we can disable the adjustment layer as well. Oh well, we can disable it by turning the eye off. The right click disable layer mask we'll get into in a little while. Okay, so I've intensified the exposure slightly by 1.5. And what I'm going to do is, I kind of like what it's done. It's kind of emphasised the metallic quality of these sculptural forms here at the front. However, it's completely blown out the sky in the background. So what I'm going to do is use the mask, activate the mask, and I'm just going to go over to the left hand side of my window, down to the tools. I'm looking for the gradient tool. The gradient tool looks like this, goes from black to white. Now, if your gradient tool isn't there in the toolbar, it's possibly you're seeing the paint bucket. If you just click, hold, and then choose the gradient tool. The gradient tool settings can be adjusted at the top of the screen up here. We're just going to start today with the standard setting, which is either white to black or black to white. So I'm not going to adjust those just yet. I'm just going to leave them as they are. I'm going to leave the various other settings which we'll come back to at another time. So for the time being, I've got a gradient tool, I've got my exposure layer mask here, and what I'm going to do is just drag, click and drag from the top halfway down. Now what you'll see straight away is that the blue in the sky has been returned to the image, so I've taken that exposure adjustment, 1.5 adjustment, off the top of the image, but it's still present in the bottom of the image. Here we go. If I turn it off, you'll see that the bottom section of the image becomes darkened. If I turn it on, it becomes brightened, and all the while, because I've got this layer mask now operating using the gradient, all the while the blue sky is unaffected by it. Nice, that could be very, very useful. What if I go back in here and really emphasize the exposure setting? You can see visibly where the gradient is affecting the image, and that's kind of roughly from this point onwards, the top of the image. So the exposure settings not being influenced by that because we've got the gradient active. Now there's other ways to use this gradient mask, and I'll get into those when I introduce other adjustment layers. Okay, so there's one adjustment layer for the time being. I'll just turn it off. So I'm just deactivating, but keeping it in the exposure in the layer stack here. Okay, so let's put another adjustment layer on. This time round, let's look at a photo filter. This is something you'll do frequently in the darkroom when you're working with your color images. You can add various color filters to increase the warmth or the coolness of an image. So the first photo filter that loads automatically is the warming filter. It's got a density of 25%. We normally leave preserved luminosity ticked, and we can ramp up or down the intensity of that filter. So let's look at some of the other filters. Now I'm not sure this will work for you, but when I select a filter, as long as the box remains active with that blue highlight around it, I can use the up and down keys on my keyboard to scroll down the various filters down to another type of warming filter and so forth. So when you hear that tap, that's me changing, that's a cooling filter, and basically they all have their various qualities that will either enhance or decrease certain color ranges in your image. So the red filter is interesting in that, let's see what it's actually doing to the color. So look what it's doing to that green area there. It's quite interesting. That's quite a shift, which it's a shift that I like, if I'm honest. I think I quite like the shift that the red filter is offering. The intensity can be ramped up or ramped down, but I kind of like it like that. Again, I might not like what it's doing to the sky, so I could use the gradient filter like we did before, or alternatively I could use a paintbrush, and I'm going to be painting in this white, well, this active mask is indicated here, and what I'm going to need is a black paintbrush. So flick the color selector over. By the way, that color selector can be flicked over or changed between black and white just by hitting the X key on the keyboard. This is really useful, and you'll get used to using this. It's very, very useful. Okay, so first things first, I'm just using a standard brush, nothing exceptional, and what I'm going to do is I normally put the opacity to somewhere like 30–40%. Okay, and the size of the brush can be most easily adjusted using the square brackets on the keyboard. The left square bracket decreases the brush and the right one increases it. I would get used to using those. So here's a really nice way of working with adjustment layers. We've got a red photo filter, we've got a layer mask, and now with a black brush selected, I'm going to paint in, and you'll see it just appearing slightly down there. Remember, the opacity is set to 42%. just so I can show you how it works a little bit more efficiently. I'm going to put it back to 100%, and I'm just going to scrub in the image. Now watch, you should see, and I'll zoom in here so you can see this a little bit easier. You can see that as I paint over it, the tone, the colour range of that top section is changing, because basically I'm painting in a mask which is allowing the original colours to be viewed on screen. So the red filter is no longer affecting the areas that I'm painting with this black mask. Okay, so I'm just going to paint those in, and I'll just turn it on and off to show you the difference. So here's the eye off and on. And you'll see what happens is when it's on, we have our effect just influencing the sculptural forms at the bottom, but not the top. Okay, so watch what happens if I right click and disable the mask. Right click, disable the mask. You'll see that that red filter now influences the sky and the green foliage as well, which is not what I want, so I'm going to re-enable that mask. So it's quite subtle, but really, really nice. So let's imagine that you've got your mask active, you've got your black paintbrush active, and you accidentally start painting through this section here. You didn't mean to, and suddenly you've distorted this area. So you can, maybe it's easier if I do it down here at the front, and I've made a mistake. I've started to paint in the wrong section. It's really simple to correct a layer mask, very non-destructive. Just hit the X button on your keyboard. It changes the color swatch back to white, and then you can paint back over the section that you've just accidentally painted on, and it will vanish. The effect of that mask that you accidentally put in will be undone, and you'll see it just vanishing slightly down there. If I right click on these and go to where are my panel options, I'm just going to go to large thumbnail size for the moment so you can see it a little bit easier. Okay, that's much more useful, isn't it? Okay, so now I can paint that back in over the top like that, and thereby undoing any mask area that I hadn't wanted to actually paint into the image. Fantastic. Okay, so let's zoom out, Control and minus, or on a Mac, Command and minus, zoom out, and just have a quick review of what we've got. So that's with the red filter off, that's with it on, I prefer it on, and that's with the exposure layer on, and again I'm going to leave that on, and all the while I've managed to keep the effect of both of those filters away from this area at the top, which is kind of what I wanted. Okay, great stuff. So let's add another adjustment layer. Oh, by the way, while you're going through all this, I would definitely recommend that you do frequent saving. So I'm just going to save this to the desktop, and I'll just call it adjustment layer underscore test underscore 01. Okay, and of course I saved that as a PSD file format. Okay, so let's do another quick one. This time around, let's add selective color. This one's quite interesting in that you can pinpoint certain areas of color that you want to enhance. So let's have a little look at what's working on, what it's working on here. So the cyan can be decreased or increased depending what you want from your image. Let's look through to see if there's any advantages in here that I'd like to add to the image. So yellows, I'm predominantly looking at the sculptural form here at the front to see if there's anything that I really want from it, and if I'm honest, there really probably isn't. maybe the green at the front, the green sculptural form at the front, maybe I like what it's doing. Just to the form itself, this form, rather than everything, but in truth I don't. So I'm just going to click it, drag it down to the bin icon, release it and get rid of it. That's probably all I need to do with that. Okay, so I'm going to add a vibrance adjustment layer. So click on the vibrance setting. This one's kind of interesting in that you can get a nice kind of desaturation if you like. So let's look a little bit closer at the image and let's look at what the vibrance is offering. So if you hike it up, you're getting stronger, more vibrant colours, but if you go the other way, you've got a little bit of desaturation. Well, let's just emphasize this. So we'll play with the desaturation down there at -32. Okay, so turn it on and off. Let's have a little look at the change. And okay, I'm going to go with that. This may be just me, but one of the things I really struggle with is, oddly enough, green foliage. It just frequently can look really artificial in the photograph. So sometimes vibrance is good in that it can knock down the green aspect of the image, but what it's also done is it's knocked down the vibrancy of this colour in the sculptural form at the front, which I don't want it to do. So time for a mask again, of course. So the quick option is to throw a gradient in, and this time I'm going to click from the bottom, drag to the top. Let's look at how that vibrance is now influencing the image, and you can see again it's taking out just the section at the top, which is what I want, leaving the vibrancy of the sculptural form at the bottom intact. Again, I could, if I wished, be even more precise and use a brush to paint in a black mask into this area. But I don't, just for the sake of the tutorial, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so we've got three adjustment layers. We go back to our original image and you can see it's got a real color cast to it down there. So I've got my photo filter, got my exposure setting, I've got a vibrance adjustment layer, all of which are just adding to give the image the color balance that I'm looking for. This time around I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer. This is quite interesting. This is really gives you a lot to control if you want to generate a black and white image from a color image. Gives you a lot to control because of the way that the cyan, magenta, yellow, red, green and blue are all available to you. And it's got some presets that you can play with, like maximum blacks, etc., which are again really useful. That's really useful in bringing out the highlights in the metal structure. Now, okay, so the quality here is that you can, of course, let's just play with this for a second. We've got a mask available. I'm going to use a gradient again, and I'm going to go top to bottom. Maybe I'm going to go the other way around. Okay, I'm going to start my gradient, click somewhere in the middle, go to about there, to introduce, should I wish, a black and white and coloured image. Of course, if you really wanted to do it with a great degree of control, just use the brush and you can paint in or paint out the areas that you wish to be black or coloured, and hit the X button. I can paint those back in like so. Alright, like so. Of course, I'm not happy with the mask. I can disable it or delete the layer mask. So I right clicked, I deleted it. I can add a new layer mask anytime I wish. Down here, the little icon there, click that. Got brand new clean layer mask to go again, should I wish to. And I can paint in the areas that I want to include in my image. So if I want to add just a really striking piece of colour, I can do that. And again, I just clip that guy's leg there because I was just rushing it slightly. So hit X, back to the white, paint, using the left square bracket, and I can just brush that out should I wish to. Okay, so you can play with that with the layer mask. Well, I'm going to delete the layer mask. I just want the black and white effect, and the reason I want the black and white effect is just slide those up. The reason is If you have a black and white layer, what you can do is you can adjust the blending balance from normal to luminosity. Okay, so when you flick it to luminosity, it blends with the color layers beneath. So I'll just turn it off and on, and you'll see, just zoom in on the image again, you'll see that it can add tonal range, definition, and sometimes a little bit of clarity here and there to highlights or shadows, depending on what you want. Again, this is nice. We can of course add our layer mask back in, or we can play with the opacity slider and we can introduce just enough, so off, on. And what I like about it when it's on, it's just bringing a little bit more light back to that area. However, I would say that even though it's bringing light back to these areas in here on the sculptural form, which is useful, I don't really like what it's doing to his red top. It's taking a little bit too much colour out of there, so take my paintbrush, flick to black, zoom in on him alone, so Control and plus to zoom right in, and then I can add the colour back in there by just adding a little mask. Okay, same with the little kid that's beside him, classically on his phone, not paying attention to anything. Actually, that's not true. What he's really playing with there is the museum interactive audio guide. So, fair dues to the little fella. Okay, so we've got a few things to play with. So, luminosity, on or off depending on what it is that you want from the image. We've got a vibrancy, which if you look at the top part of the image is going to influence the foliage and the clouds. We've got an exposure setting, which is adding a little bit of life back into this area here at the front, and we have a photo filter, all of which can be returned to just by clicking on the little icon here and re-experimented with depending on what you want to do. And of course the whole thing is non-destructive, meaning that you can turn them on and off, disable them, bin them, start again, all the while your original image sitting underneath is completely intact and untouched. I'm going to stop there. So just to remind, as you're going through this, make sure that you are screenshotting the tools and the procedures. Experiment, record your experiments, and just get used to using it confidently. That's the point. So don't just do it once and say I've done it. I want you to experiment and do it. Push your understanding of it and see what effects and interesting aspects it can throw into your work. Okay, over to you. See you later.